And here we go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is an internationally known speaker, strategic expert, and consultant who has spoken to hundreds of thousands of people around the world. His career began in the financial services industry where he achieved massive success, but this was just the beginning. He then became a passionate student of personal and professional development techniques. He used these concepts to launch and build a new company into a cutting-edge telecommunications giant with over 5,000 salespeople worldwide. The company went public when he was only 26. In 1991, he was introduced to author and peak performance coach Anthony Robbins. He began working as a trainer with Mr. Robbins and was quickly promoted to master trainer. He then began speaking and conducting seminars as a lead speaker. Currently, he is senior head trainer at the Anthony Robbins Companies. He has spoken at Unleash the Power Within, Wealth Mastery, Leadership Academy, Date with Destiny, and Platinum Partnership events around the world. His work has led him to consult with companies in a diverse number of fields, such as financial services, aerospace, software, direct sales, publishing, entertainment, governmental, and more. Welcome to the show, Joe Williams.
Thank you so much, man. Make me sound so important. I better live up to the hype, huh?
I know. It was awesome. I loved getting introduced to you and looking through that. And I was like, the more I read, the more I was like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. You've been, doing so much. I felt like it was important to share everything that you've done. And So where do we begin? If I'm just as excited as you are, man. We had a nice little brief talk, but
we did.
Just give us a little background on how you got all into this, because at 26, you've already taken the world by the horns, and that's already not even starting. You're not even warming up.
Yeah. I mean, I always say that the secret to sounding like you've done that much, even at my age now, which is still relatively young, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, although some days it doesn't necessarily feel that way, is start young and run real fast. And that's kind of what I did. I guess you could say in retrospect, I'd probably say kind of thrown to the wolves at a very young age, in that I started my first business when I was late 16, almost 17 years old, because when I was 16, just turning 16, unfortunately, my parents got a couple of years of free housing in the federal prison system for some tax evasion charges. So my sister and I were basically on our own from that age. And I went out and I was a pizza delivery boy, I remember, for Domino's for 2 weeks one time to start off, try to make ends meet. And I knew I couldn't feed us. So I started a little janitorial service, and that was really my first business, and started kind of growing from there. So, we can go as far or as deep or as long as you want into all of that, but start young and start running fast, and it makes accomplishing quite a bit seem a little bit easier than it is on paper.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. So you're kind of forced into the entrepreneurial world, but then you start taking action. So yeah, I guess give us like that brief overview of that journey, because it's a pretty spectacular journey.
Yeah. So very briefly, I'm 18, 19 years old. I've been a janitor. Along that route also, very interestingly, I actually fell skiing one time. I was attempting to do, if you remember what was called in those days, this was give you an idea, probably 1987. I was attempting what was called a back scratcher. I don't know if you remember those on skis rather than on boards.
Exactly what a back scratcher is. It's very epic.
Bang. Came down really hard, and about a week later started getting really sick. I mean, I bruised myself up really badly, didn't break anything, but started getting really sick. And as it turned out, I only had one functioning kidney that we didn't know about, because, you can exist perfectly on one. So as a kid, we never knew about it, but I shut it down because of the trauma. So I actually had a kidney transplant when I was 17, got one from my father. So I'm rocking along, 17, 18, 19 years old. My folks have been in prison. I'm supporting my sister and I through being a janitor and then cleaning houses during the day. And a friend of the family came and said, I think you'd be perfect for the wealth creation business. And I said, great, sign me up, And he said, awesome, we're going to send you to class for a couple of weeks. And after the first week, I kind of looked around and I thought, boy, they're teaching me a lot about insurance, not really teaching me how to be wealthy. And then the next week I thought, well, they're teaching me about mutual funds and how to sell them, but not really about how to be wealthy. And as you can imagine, I was recruited into the insurance and mutual fund sales business when I was 19. So that was kind of my first taste of anything like that. Was a sales job. I went to my first event with Tony when I was 20. And through a weird twist of events, we actually got introduced and met when I was 21 and got to be friends. And first and foremost, that was always and still is today, that's still our primary connection as friends. And, as you said, I kind of rose through the ranks. All the while, I'd start taking some money that I'd saved and invested it with some partners to start a small, long-distance phone service reseller. Now, for people who are under the age of 35, 40 years old, it sounds foreign to think that we used to pay for long distance service, but man, that was a huge business in the early 90s. And my little meager savings, I had an opportunity to start this company with. And so that's what we did. So I'm building this company and volunteering and going and being a trainer with Tony. And we take it public when I'm 26. And I immediately realized, and I'm sure you can relate to this and some others can, I realized I'd made a mistake. I was not cut out to sit in an office, 9, 10, 12 hours a day and answer to a board of directors and everything else. So it took a couple of years to spin out of that. And in 98, I was taking some time off. My daughter was born that year. And, I kind of was thinking about what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And I started getting into speaking and consulting, and everything just kind of went from there. And I also, right around that time, Tony tapped me to start speaking for him some. And that's where I started speaking at Wealth Mastery. I had the good fortune of leading that from 2001 to 2013 as one of the lead speakers and being kind of his feet and eyes and everything there because it was what we called a Tony Not There event for all those years. I was head trainer for the organization. And then as I transitioned out of that, they made me this kind of perennial role. It's really an oversight role called senior head trainer that I'm in today. So in addition to all that, along the way, started teaching people how to speak and presentation skills. I think honestly, because it was so unnatural for me, I had such a difficult time with it. I went the trial and error route, and it took me 6 years to kind of beat my head against a wall to finally get to the point to be, enjoy it and be somewhat good. And so along that path as well, I started helping people who wanted to be able to communicate their message, communicate their gifts and their innate and unique talents. I believe that, all of us are born with something greater to do. There's no doubt about that. And some of us specifically have a calling to share that with others. Not everybody does, as I've found through the years of working with people. Yet some people are really called to it. And when they're called to it, sometimes just the simple mechanics and the conditionings of childhood and things like that, if we can clear those out of the way, we can allow them to share those gifts and their genius even more powerfully. And so that's the primary area in which I play now is really helping people in the field of speaking, presentation skills, and so forth. So, dude, you take it from there and then go as far into woo-woo land as you want, because I promise I've been there with you as well. So let's
Well, yeah, you tempted me. I'm trying not to skip steps here.
No worries, no worries.
Well, it's an interesting background, and I think that you just kind of touched on a few things where when you're younger, it's about getting that success, that financial security. It's finding that. You found that. Then you go down and you basically are around the best in the world on peak performance, personal development, achieving your highest potential type of scenario. So I think that that's a really important thing. And I'm wondering the best way to phrase the question, but figuring out like some sort of tools, like some of the best tools that you learned along the way, or how do we help somebody who's listening to this? Because I think there's a lot of people out there that want to just break out of what they're doing, but it's hard. You know what I mean? You've got, how do we overcome that fear? How do we figure out our gift and then figure out that we're good enough to create a business around it or make that move? So I know that you've encountered a lot of clients. You've had probably massive success, as I've seen in the bio, and just your everyday Joes, and watch them walk out and flower. So, maybe you could like walk through some of the common strategies or the common limiting beliefs that people have, because even with Tony Robbins, I've read his books and I've done NLP, and you're eliciting limiting beliefs. But
Yes.
if you don't do that kind of work, then you're kind of not aware of the programming running the ship. And so this is something that I can recognize you're an expert in. And so maybe you can kind of give some tools and feedback for, somebody who's looking to level up, find their purpose and have the courage and overcome that fear to start making a living.
Yeah. So there's a lot inside of what you just asked. And, if I had to kind of chunk it for everyone as we answer this, kind of think of it as three main things that you ask about. And that was like, number one, how do you find your purpose? How do you find that calling? How do you know what that thing is that maybe you just feel the draw towards something. You just know there's something inside. I mean, that's where I started, obviously, when 18, 19 years old. I didn't know the direction to go in, but I knew there was something that was going to be there. So I get that. That's chunk number one. Chunk number two, then, I guess, would be, how do you get the courage to actually take the steps? And then number three would be a little more tactically, what are the steps? Step one, step two, step three, step four that I would suggest maybe the person follow then to follow that dream. So is that a good way to kind of unpack everything inside of what you just asked?
100%. I love it. And usually it's funny because what I'll do is I just basically concept things and I throw it at my guest, and you just totally like NLP, Tony Robbins training me. I'm like, hold on one second. This chunk strategy, this chunk strategy, this chunk strategy. So yes, please, let's do it like that.
Okay. Well, as you can tell, I did spend a few years doing that. So, okay, let's start at the beginning. And that is, first and foremost, I guess, how do you find that calling? The answer is there's a lot of different ways. If you think about it, historically, few things tend to happen for people. Number one, they seem to almost be born or know from early in childhood kind of what that thing was. That might be the first type person. They have a good sense from an early age that they were cut out to do something, but that's not most people. That's a rare few. The other ones tend to fall into like number two, they have some significant emotional event that happens maybe in their youth, maybe in their teens, 20s, that development era, young adulthood, we might call that, or it may happen later in life, but there's something, and it might be an illness. It might be a divorce. It might be a business, losing a business. On the converse, though, people don't think about this. Those significant emotional events are not always, though, pain point events. Now, most of the time, let's be honest, quote my friend Tony, people tend to party when they're successful, and when they fail, they tend to ponder. So most people do tend to have those significant emotional events that they change from, be ones that are painful or that were difficult to go through. But I really encourage people, as you start looking toward what's my calling, don't discount that which has been a gift or has been something that you were unexpectedly successful at or unexpectedly good at. Don't dwell into the pain points, the failures, the illnesses, the upsets. Those are a major, major catalyst. There's no doubt about that for helping people kind of find, because what we get a good sense from, to answer your question in a broader sense, when we're looking for what we want to do, what our calling is, what our passion is, well, one quick way to figure it out is what the F you don't want to do. And get that like really in a bone jarring way. And that tends to wake people up real quickly to what they do want to do. Now, inside of that, then, as you move into the second thing is, okay, well, how do I get the courage to actually take action on this thing and get started? Well, the first thing is be ready to make every mistake that you're going to make and persevere. That goes without saying. But I really think the critical thing there is that's where you start getting into more work, as you're talking about, with taking a look at your beliefs. Taking a look at what you've, been taught, or at least what you think is true. That's one thing that people, they hear this word beliefs and they make it this big thing. Here's what it is. Take what you think is true, what you're sure is true about yourself, about the world, about other people, and get really good at questioning it. And starting to say, well, wait a minute, is that really true? I mean, obviously, one of the people's work for people that are trying to find courage and challenge their limiting beliefs, one of the work I recommend for people personally, it's just one of the most elegant things I think that was ever written on it, was Byron Katie's work. Her work on, it's called The Work, in fact. And if you're not familiar with it, it basically is having you look at all types of beliefs, starting with limiting ones, and saying, well, is that true? And your first answer is always yes. And then you go deeper. Well, come on, is that really true? Do you really 1,000% of the time know that that's absolutely true? And of course, at some point you just kind of go, well, no, I guess it's not absolutely true all the time for everybody, but it is for me. Okay, great. Who are you when you believe that? And you really have to take a look at, if I really get into this limiting belief, who do I become? And what most people realize is I shrink. I become my worst and least, as opposed to my highest and best. And so the next question would be, who are you without those beliefs? And that's when you can begin to take a look at, well, if I were freed from that, and you get a real glimpse, and that's where courage starts to grow. And as one final nail in the coffin for people that aren't familiar with their work, you take that belief and you turn it around. So for instance, when I started out, I can give you a really perfect example of this. One of my beliefs when I was, in my 20s, give you an idea, dude. I didn't graduate high school. I told you I started early. I had to leave high school to support my sister and I. So here I am, no high school diploma, a partner in this company, and we're talking about taking it public. And I had to challenge the limiting belief, I'm too young. I'm too young for this. There's no way. No one's going to try. My background, I don't have the education, all those other things stacked on top of that, but I'm too young. The final thing you do with Byron Katie's work, though, is you challenge that belief by doing a turnaround, she calls it. And a turnaround on I'm too young is, well, I'm too young. I am too young. That's what makes this a great opportunity. Thank God I'm not old and jaded like my partners are and know every reason why they can't succeed. They're real good at knowing their limitations because they're so old. And you just work to start building a new belief that empowers you and takes you where you want to go. That's really chunk number 2, the courage part. If you're not familiar with, people aren't familiar with Byron Katie's work, I'd go out and get one of her books and it'll explain everything. Great, great resource for people to develop courage. I think that's one of the most elegant ways to do it. And then the final thing is, what are the tactics? So, what are the step-by-step things? And that's really where you get into goal setting, time management, vision boarding, daily manifestation meditations. Personally, I believe that is not negotiable, because just because it is unexplainable and or I don't know how it works, or I can't explain all the ins and outs of the law of manifestation, I also have to, at some point in my life, maybe think about the fact that while it may be undescribable, it is undeniable. And so it's something that just because I can't maybe logically describe it, and by the way, we can go down the rabbit holes of logical description on all that as well, because I have my thoughts on that, of why it actually works and why thoughts are things. And our daily manifestation meditations are not, that is a hard and fast tactic to use as part of your third pillar in your question there, which would be the daily actions and what do you actually do to make rubber meet the road and get out there and go after that goal and that calling once you have it and you have the courage built up. Then what are the things you do? As I said, simple goal setting, time management, all of that. But then there's the stuff that some people make negotiable and they throw out because they can't quantify its day-to-day payback. And those are things like vision boarding and things like manifestation meditations and things like good karma. There are things in the world that I just classify them for myself as, undescribable yet undeniable. So because they're undeniable, I am not going to ignore the importance of them in my daily life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%, man. That was
so now I know I opened up a lot. So now we can go as deep as you want into either that, or we can go someplace else or wherever you'd like to go.
Yeah, hey, well, I'm with you. So feel free to steer the ship wherever you want. Right. And I'll just draw a couple bridges because I think that what you were saying is so amazing. The one thing that I learned from one of my first mentors, Michael Lozier, who wrote the book, The Law of Attraction, is getting very clear on what you don't want, a clarity through contrast list. So basically, if you're in a job you hate, write every single thing that you hate and write it all out. And then, I was like, I hate working 40 hours a week. I hate working for somebody who doesn't appreciate me. I hate having to, whatever the case is. And then you stop and you ask yourself, so what do I want?
Yeah.
The contrast breeds clarity. Now you're very clear on what it is that you actually want. And the contrast is a really big gift, and it's so simple. So now we have this more clarity of where we want to shoot. So I think that's really important. And identifying the limiting beliefs, is really huge, and looking at that because they're going to hold you back no matter what. And as long as we can keep shedding them, we're going to be able to move forward. And then the last piece you touched on, and yeah, I'd love to hear your explanation. You said a non-negotiable. The thing when I train with an extreme sports athlete, that's an extreme motocross rider, is going to do a front flip. It's non-negotiable for him to visualize that trick. It's non-negotiable for a high diver that's jumping off something that's 30 meters or something, 100 feet. And to do like a quad backflip, they have to visualize it because they can literally die. They don't get the necessity of like, oh, maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. they know it works, it becomes mandatory, and they apply it. And it is that necessity for survival that forces it. But every single person can apply that technique. And there's not a lot of science around it, but the way that there's growing science around it, tons of science. It's just
and
not common.
Here's where the science is, though. If you really want to go into it and look at it, just look at science on mental rehearsal, because that's really what you're talking about, right? And there is tons of science there on mental rehearsal and the effectiveness of it through the decades. So, a person could but we have these different terms that we never kind of look for the common threads of where they go by different names. Sometimes those of us that are on a path, we find a new shiny penny arena that we go into in our study. God knows I do this still to this day all the time. And we get enamored with a new way of saying something or new terminology. And we don't realize that though there are synonymous terms for things in this universe, and they don't look for where is this synonymous to something that's similar from that I can really, maybe draw a deeper understanding from looking into this similar topic as well, because you got visualization with you 100%. Look at the sports science behind, mental rehearsal. And there's quite a bit there, that a person could dig into if they want like proof that visualization is an important thing to do in their everyday life on a daily basis. Cool. Just go read up on mental rehearsal and you'll find tons there, because it's just what you're talking about. It is mandatory for athletes. And yet most people don't think of themselves as social, spiritual, and mental and emotional athletes. Yet to be at our best, we all must be that.
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely misspoke. I didn't mean there's lots of, there's tons of science. It's not common knowledge. And I'm glad that's true. Cause in Zen Athlete, I looked for the science of it, of why it works, but I didn't need the science. I knew it worked. I could feel in my guts that it made sense. And I grew up a martial artist. And so it was all about mind, body, spirit. I just knew that this made sense. And I talk about different states of consciousness. You've got your waking taskless consciousness. You've got a kind of like a bigger expanded consciousness. You maybe have a heart consciousness, something that's more governing feelings. And so the levels of this that I see, you've got mental rehearsal, shooting basketball free throws. They did a study where one group shot the free throw, one did nothing, one just visualized, and the one that shot the free throw for 30 minutes a day for a week was 24% improved. And then the one visualized was 23% improved without even shooting a basketball shot. But what we're also talking about is this holistic energy. If you just burn one end of the candle in one way of, like, say, masculine or taskless, that's no way to live, and you're not going to be that peak performer. One of the things I'll say with the athletes or even business is that if your self-worth is on the line and everything is about your business and that's your whole life, you don't have a whole life, and it's going to be stressful because it's become your identity. Rather than if you have this holistic approach to living, which is probably more important in the view of like how you live life. A good friend of mine, Anders, is an incredible artist. Check him out, anderspeterson.ca. But he said, my life is my highest form of art, how I live. And I totally feel the same way. Martial arts has given me the gift of how I navigate my existence. What is most important to me? So I'd love to give that back to you and talk about some of the research that you've seen, because, in sports, it's mandatory, and people, that's how you have to land a trick you've never been done or never been done by anybody. Then Dr. Joe Dispenza is putting out lots of work and science on people are curing themselves of terminal illness through the magic of their body. And we're talking about how amazing the body is. And then, so there is stuff out there. So I want to throw it back to you and stop yammering and hear your thoughts.
No, I mean, okay, there's several ways we can go inside of that. Let's go with the highest level, though, of what you've just said, and hopefully something I can offer on this. Because I am I can tend to be a driver and tend to be intense. There is no doubt about it. Yet, by the same token, what you're saying about having a whole life and having, the relationships and having the health and having, looking at the total package, obviously I 1,000% agree with. And live, and it's really the ultimate goal of what we're going after here. That being said, let's touch on Joe's work, for instance. I mentioned that that I had a kidney transplant when I was 17. When you have an organ transplant, I got it from my father, so they released him from prison long enough to give me a kidney and then put him back in. But I got it from him. We were a close tissue match. But when a person has a transplanted organ, I'm not sure how familiar you are with that. Anyone who's got a medical background in your audience will be, though. You're put on what's called immune suppression drugs for the rest of your life. They're basically really, really strong steroids, to give you an idea. So things like, if you're familiar with prednisone, it's a cortisone, strong cortisone steroid, versions of that. And you're on them for the rest of your life. And basically, think of it as this. It's medically induced, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's almost like medically induced AIDS type symptoms. In other words, you have no immune system. Your immune system is shut down. It shuts down your immune system because when an organ is transplanted into a person's body, their immune system sees that as a foreign object and it attacks it and destroys it. So if someone has a kidney transplant or a heart transplant or a liver transplant or whatever, then you're on immune suppression for the rest of your life. And so I was 17 when I got it. I rolled along. When they gave me the talk after the transplant, they said, enjoy your next 20 years because no one's ever lived longer than 20 years with a kidney transplant. And by the way, 20 years from now, what these drugs are going to do to your body, you're going to wish you were dead. Now, at 17 years old, that sounded like a pretty good deal because realize, I was only 17 and I was going to die otherwise. So I rolled along for a few years, taking every day the immune suppression medications. And I'm in my early 20s. So that's when I met Tony. I became a raw foodist, vegan, and then raw foodist. I was an ultra runner. I played around with adventure racing, things like that as well. I come from a background of motocross, BMX, and skateboards. And so, I had all that going for me. Moved through my 20s. In my late 20s, I kind of unexplainably started gaining weight, and even with everything I was doing. But I'd started speaking. I kind of figured I'm out on the road. I'll just roll with it. Go into my early 30s. By the time I'm 34, my body is breaking down. I'm having like joint pain that's so bad. It's what like a 65, 70-year-old person would have. And it's from these immune suppression drugs. And one night I got word that my best friend, who I'd been one of the people who got him started riding motorcycles, unfortunately was killed in an accident in Thailand. And my daughter was very young. She's 5 years old, I believe, at the time, if I'm recalling the ages correctly, almost 6 maybe. And we just found out my wife at the time was pregnant with my son. And I remember sitting there all night just crying my eyes out, because partially for my friend, partially because I knew, as I had projected forward in my mind, I started thinking of the consequences of those drugs on my body. And I knew that 5 years from now, when he went to his kindergarten, first day of kindergarten, I'd be in a wheelchair. And I sat that night and I did everything that I just kind of ran through with you, as in a sense. I've never thought of it that way, but I did. I did the challenging of the beliefs, everything else, because I was faced with only one thing, and that is I must figure out a way to get off of these immune suppression medications before they kill me. And I must keep a transplanted organ, which anybody in your audience, at least at that time, it was medically impossible. And so I went to work and did all the things I just talked to you about. I set the goal. I set up vision boards for myself with it. I didn't even tell my wife I was doing this at the time. I sent it out into the universe. I would every morning get up and I would affirm and incant this. I will find a way to do this. I will find a way to do this. I wrote it down. I did all the stuff that people think, oh, that's just. Oh, that's just goal setting. Oh, that's just changing your mindset. Oh, that's just. I think, oh, that's just mental barriers block people from more in their lives than they have any idea it really does. Do you know what I mean? They think, oh, that's just, or, oh, I already know that and I already do it. I went back to the basics, man, and I did everything I knew. And within about 2 weeks, through a weird twist of events, as the universe likes to give us, I got introduced to the guy who did the first ever kidney transplant in the United States, Dr. Thomas Starzl. He runs the Starzl kidney, or transplant, I should say, ward out of University of Pennsylvania. And I started working with him, and they said, you know, there's a real off chance that somebody with a tissue to match that close and who's been on immune suppression like you have for a long time, never had rejection, there's a chance. And I said, fuck it, man. Sorry, I pardon my language, but that's me. When I get in this state, fuck it, man, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I've got to do it. I don't have any other choice. And so I weaned myself off of immune suppression, which at the time, and still is for most people, considered medically impossible. They wrote a white paper about me. It also, though, started the further research that's now been done into ways that transplant patients are weaned off of immune suppression from some of the work that I had the good fortune of doing at a very young age, or, earlier in my life, not a very young age, 34, to wean off of immune suppression, keep a transplanted kidney, and never take immune suppression again in my life. Now, I'm not suggesting any of your listeners do that at all. It was very risky what I did. I did it with doctors and so forth, but it's not something you want to take lightly. What I'm saying is when you start talking about medical miracles and how all of this can play in, dude, I am literally living proof sitting here right now that the impossible is possible. But it takes incredible commitment. I think it also really takes doing that which we think we already know. Realize at that time I was teaching wealth mastery for Tony. I had just become his head trainer. I knew all of it. And I didn't just think to myself, well, I know it all, so that's enough. That malady of mind, body, spirit of I know it all, or I know what to do, and that's enough. That is not what separates those of us in the world that make these incredible things happen from those who just wish that they maybe could. I think the difference is to say, I'm going to do what the hell I know. And that's what the humbleness, and the gratitude and so forth, everything that comes with being able to knock yourself down to size and do what it takes and do what is necessary, even down to the most simple and most basic. Many times is what separates those who are able to actually pull something off from those who just discount it and think, well, I already know that and that's enough. Knowing is not enough. We must do. So I hope, does that give you, first, you talk about medical impossibilities. I don't believe there's any medical impossibility. I do believe, though, that it should be done intelligently, and it should be done in concert with good medical oversight, 100%, but also good medical oversight as well. You don't want to be working with somebody who knows it's not possible, so they're going to treat you that way. You definitely want to work with people who, are playing on your same wavelength, yet can have your back from a safety standpoint.
Wow. Holy smokes. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that story. That goes into so much because you're really talking about going against the grain. They say to you, it's impossible. So much of our culture is imposed on us and they say it's impossible. They did a study on, I can't remember exactly what happened, but it was on authority, and you put somebody in a white jacket, like as a doctor. Do you know?
It's Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so people will just basically bred to take our authority outside of us, and I think that's a really big thing. And what you did is you took the power back in, and then it also forces you into this like faith realm. You were like squeezed right in and be like, oh my goodness, there's, I need to access this thing that is beyond me. And feel free to jump in if anything clicks.
No, 100%, man. I mean, here's the thing I believe. I believe that, that which a person, that which we discount as, it sounds so cliche as I'm getting ready to say, but that which we discount as impossible will always remain that way. That sounds so cliche. A better way of putting it is this. I always used to ask people in events when I used to do, even goal setting, for instance, for Tony. Sounds simplistic. We all have goals. If you ask any person walking down the street, everybody says, yes, they have goals. Many people have seen the study from I believe it was the Yale graduating class of 1953, where they polled them and they said, how many of you actually have written goals? Number was 3%. They went back and studied the exact same people 30 years later, 1983. And what they found was, same 3% had written goals. The other 97%, let's be clear, the other 97% said they had goals. It was just the 3% had actually written them down. And what they found was that 3% had lower incidences of divorce, they hadn't died at as young an age, they had better health and longer life, but the quantifiable was they were worth more, they were better adjusted, and they were worth more than the other 97% combined. Now, that study is taught all the time and anecdotal. Here's what's important to that in my mind. Is the process of taking the invisible and making it visible, the process of manifestation that we all talk about so much, what if it were as simple as when I pull that whatever electrical impulse, that divine spirit, whatever it might be, if I pull it out and I bring it into manifestation by putting it onto a page, does that, it's not the end yet, but does that not start The process of manifestation. Have you not taken the invisible and brought it into physical reality at its start, at its seed? Just like if you're going to grow a tree, you got to start with a seed. That is your seed. And then what you do from there is what actually grows it. And I used to say this process of, for instance, visualization, and visualizing so that you feel how it will be to accomplish a goal and things like that. Here's the truth about that. You're actually getting your unconscious mind, activated by doing that. Now, we talk about the conscious mind. You mentioned that earlier, the unconscious mind, whatever a person wants to call it, the other than conscious mind. Studies show that your unconscious mind is at least 30,000 times more powerful than your conscious mind. Newest studies that I've seen by Bruce Lipton say 65,000 times, but let's just say 30,000 to be conservative. And I always just say to people, how many of you know yourself to be powerful, strong, capable, able? When you set your mind to something, you can go out and get it done. Raise your hands. And people always raise their hands. And I say, here's the truth. You have no freaking clue what you're really capable of, because you're capable of at least 30,000 times more than you know yourself to be. When you power up that part of you that causes your heart to beat 50,000 times a day, your fingernails, your hair to grow without you having to think about it, your body to completely regenerate itself every year, cell by cell. And what we also don't realize is the science, as you asked for, behind what you were talking about, the enteric nervous system in your body. This is emerging science. If anybody wants to read up on it, pick up the book, The Second Brain. It talks about your enteric nervous system in the human body. And we have 100 billion neurons in our head, brain cells. You have a series of cells on the lining around your stomach called the enteric nervous system. You have a series of cells, 90 billion of those. It's 90% the same size as your brain. They're 99.9% as complex and as communicative as your neurons. They're not neurons because they're in the cells around your stomach, but it's 90% the size of the brain in your head. It's your second brain. You've got 50 billion of them around your heart. When we say I've got a gut feeling or I feel it in my heart, that is not woo-woo. That is not just something we might put off and say, oh, that's just intuition. Let's get back to the, oh, that's just for a moment. It's what stops people. No, it's not. That is a series of cells in your body trying to communicate to you because it doesn't have language. It doesn't have pictures to communicate. It has feelings. You have that feeling in your stomach. You have that feeling in your heart. That is your nervous system, your unconscious mind, your second brain screaming at you, go for this, or screaming at you, stop. And so people don't trust that because they don't go deep enough, or they think, oh, that's just a feeling. Oh, that's just, I don't have any proof on it. No, trust those things and know how to activate those things to work on your side. It's powerful, powerful stuff. And there is science behind it as well. So it's not just that, and I'm like you, I can trust that something will work easily as well. That's enough for me. If I show up that, hey, if I trust it also works, if I have faith this works, I'm really good at that as well. And I also like to have the science because it also just kind of puts that little gremlin in the back of my mind sometimes completely to bed. And so, that's a lot of, I think, what you're talking about. When you talk about, the aspects of ourselves, which are, not the masculine, not the logical, not the, it's really being able to bring together the big picture, blend all of those things together. Make sense?
Yeah, amazing. I love it all. Well, I just had Dr. Dawson Church on, and he just wrote another New York Times bestseller, amazingly brilliant, and it is around consciousness influencing the cells and how your body reacts. And, I really love what you said about, I was unaware of that. I've heard of like the stomach being the second brain, but I've also heard there's 40,000 neurons in your heart. And I think that the heart is essentially a brain, and the heart sends more signals to the brain than the brain does to the heart. And I think that culturally what we are here, and as coaching a awesome, amazing client today who has a dance studio, Lee. She's really awesome. And I think that when we're communicating with people, some people are in, you say illusion, but I think it's a cloud, and that cloud is just fear-based. Because the thing is, you can project, if you go for that business, if you get off those meds, if you take that leap of faith, and then everything can crumble. That's true. That could possibly happen. And so what happens is we kind of get stuck in this fear, and we disconnect from how powerful we are. And when you're talking about taking the action and writing it down, you know, David Lombard, the native elder I'm studying with, he's just like, you know, spirit can only help you if you say it, verbalize it. And that again is imagination. You know, I could say like, I don't know, some sort of like crazy word like guacamole ducka roll is a stupid word, but I've come up with better ones before. But until it's in that imagination realm, it doesn't become real. Right?
Yes.
Now you verbalize it. Now you've brought it from the imagination realm, from the infinite, whatever that space is, down into the physical, and that sound reverberation, how ridiculous it was, it was still reverberated, and now it became a thing. You write out that goal and it now becomes a thing, and we dismiss these small actions. And so he's making sure that I'm writing down my goals. And the other thing, Bruce Lee is a huge mentor of mine, of like how I studied and I really valued how he lived his life. He said, knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. And what you did is you got stuck in that crux and you're like, okay, got to do something. I know these principles work. And I think that this stuff for me is not complicated. We're just not doing it. And the best example that I can give is when I trained with 34th generation Shaolin masters in China, one of the masters could break stone with 2 fingers. He could break thicker ones over his head, and they could do all these things. And I was always curious, what are capable of? What are humans capable of? What is the limit of this body? And I'm constantly seeking that now. Like who's doing? Wim Hof is doing amazing stuff.
Yeah.
You guys at Tony Robbins are walking across fire. I've never done that. Seems intense. It doesn't seem to make any sense, but people are doing it. But he could break this stone, and I asked him how he did it. And long story short, if you listen to the podcast, you've heard this before, but basically years of training his fingers in hard Qigong and years of meditation Qigong, moving energy through the fingers to do something the Western world thinks is impossible. So then what I'll give back to you, because I think that there is science to this, but it's not common knowledge. That's why with Zen Athlete, what I want to do is like, hey, of course visualization works. My book is ahead of the time and behind the times at the same time. Why is all of our money and stuff on like just the body, do more squats, when every athlete has said it's always the mental game that separates the two? And you can teach self-mastery through sport. You can teach all these principles. And when you start to apply them, then you know only for yourself that they're real. And ideally, you don't have to wait till there's a catalyst to start playing with this stuff. And so what I wanted to kind of give back to you, because I'm curious in the way that we're going, is like basically like the world of like your thoughts on consciousness, consciousness, the meaning of life. How do we create a fulfilling life? We go into like things like simulation theory and trying to, understand reality to its deepest sense. What is God? But then you've got 2 kids, and we talked about them earlier. What do you want them to know? What do you think the meaning is? Like, what would you want to impart? You know, you got this wisdom. It's like, what do you want them to know? How do you want to experience this? Because I think we're learning and growing, and it's when you get to a point, hopefully, where you realize that you don't know anything at all. You know, a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. And that consciousness can only hold 5 to 7 bits of information. But if we can let that heart that's connected to, like, you could say 5D, you could say spirit, you could say whatever, it's kind of directing you around, but you're kind of stuck in this mind that can only get from spot to spot. So I'm going to leave it at that and just let you pick where you want, because I think you'd have some cool insights.
Yeah. I mean, great question. What's the meaning of life in a way?
break that one down.
Yeah. That's, hey, you want to break that one down? Here's what I would say. Here would be my 2 cents worth on that. Get silent, get still, and notice what comes to each and every one of us, and decide for yourself from a place like that. Ultimately, I think that's probably going to hold as much as anything, because, you know, as in motion as I may seem at times as well, you know, I've meditated since I was 13. And again, which is another, how the hell I got into that when I was 13, who knows? You know, I've come and gone from it through time. Yet, you know, at a big picture answer to your question, I think the question that a lot of us, and myself being one, as seekers have looked to of what is the meaning of life? What's this all about? I think, for what it's worth, as I sit here, you know, on August 1st, you know, 3 days shy of my 49th birthday, the way it sits for me is that I believe that purpose has to be found for each person individually. I think that what can cause us as seekers to get into the rabbit hole of, and I don't mean that in a good rabbit hole way, like the like the Matrix type rabbit hole. That's not what I mean. I mean like the rabbit hole where it spins us down into a place of fear and being shut down and becoming smaller and shrinking. I mean that rabbit hole. Is the rabbit hole if there's some question outside of that which I can find, which I can notice, which I can hear, and I can feel for myself. I tend to believe that is a question in which looking, outside of yourself for the answer will tend to lead to more spinning down into that rabbit hole. So my 2 cents would be for a person, for my children, for anyone else on that type question, meaning of life. What does it all mean? Why are we all here? It's going to be ultimately we have to decide for ourselves. I believe. I'm happy to tell you what I think here as I sit at 49 years old. Will it change when I'm 50? Who knows? Maybe, yeah. That's why I put it in this point in time, because you're right. I'm amazed every day by what I don't know. And so that's why I would put it within the context of, as I sit here on August 1st, or at 49 years old, let's just say, as I sit here at 49 years old, what is it? And the answer for me would be, it's creation. It's about expansion. And I don't mean creation of just money, things like that at all. I mean creation of love. I mean creation of vitality. I mean creation of heart. I mean creation of caring, in deeper and deeper and broader and broader and wider and wider and higher and bigger and smaller and smaller and smaller, all simultaneously. I don't know another way to put it other than this thing we have in the universe called paradox, those two seemingly opposites that can, though both seemingly they are opposite, yet we can choose to hold them as equally true, valid, and available to us as truths at the same time. Finding that mental balance and emotional and spiritual balancing act within ourselves as humans, I think is one of the biggest things. Because it comes down to a lot of this conversation, the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, some of those, binary questions in the universe. What if the answer were just, they're both equally powerfully as true, even though they're seemingly opposites, they're equally valid, equally important, equally as true in the same moment. And how do I find then within myself how that rests? How do I find where it's a time to act and a time for will and a time for that masculine energy, with a time for allowing, with a time for, and I don't know, by the way, where that would be as far on the spectrum of masculine, feminine. I probably shouldn't have said that, but that more driver, that more will-based activity, and then the time of allowing or the time of surrendering. That is what I believe is the essence of that personal journey, which is the meaning of life to each person. That's my 2 cents worth as I sit here at 49. That help at all?
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. I think it's really well put. The way that I kind of express it, or where I'm at with it right now, is like we're on a little boat, that we like a little sailboat at sea. And there's some of it that we can direct towards. There's these islands or these experiences we can direct towards, but some of it's out of our control. If it's a raging sea, you're like, oh my goodness. But ideally, you have the tools, and that's your consciousness. That's your body. Those are those daily practices. Those are your perspectives. Those are your beliefs that you can figure out to make sure your sail is good, so everything is in point or on, ready for when it's stormy, but you can still get to that spot. And you touched on it earlier about the process, about get ready to fail. We're so afraid to fail. Failure is a part of it. Enjoy failure, celebrate failure. You're moving towards it, but we put all this other stuff on ourselves. And so, when we talk about the meaning of life, I love that expression because it is individual and it's whatever you make it. Meaning is only what you make it. And then you do have this balancing act of like, okay, you know what? I'm moving in this direction, but also simultaneously, I can let it all go. That this is through my feeling and that heart center that's connected to all nature, all of life that's in me. I can feel that and it wants me to move this way. I'm going to go do that. And you can also, at the same time, be like, I do not want to be here, and I hate this, and your body's screaming at you. Get me out of here. It's like, no, we got to stay here because we need some money, and you don't understand. It's tough out there.
Yeah.
It's a challenging act, and I think that you really put it beautifully. So I like that answer. And then what where I kind of want to go with this, because we talked about it a little bit before, what do you think is possible as a human on this planet? Like, where do you think we're going as far as that goes? And you said you have some pretty wild stories, because I think that we focus so much on the 3D, and we focus so much on what we can see, what we can taste, what we can touch, what we can sense, what we can measure in science. But then if you look at the light spectrum, we only get like such a tiny little bit of the light spectrum. Such a tiny bit. There have been states of meditation, or I'm sure you've had experiences where it humbles you to your core, and you realize that you in fact are an eternal being, and that you're gonna continue on in some sort of form. You don't get that answer. It's not like, okay, great. You know what? I just did a meditation. I found out in my next life I turn into a unicorn. That would be great. You know what I mean? Nobody really knows, but many people have touched this space where you just have this knowing that you're eternal. And so I feel like you get a whole life to create who you are day by day. And I'm just curious, and I think it's much beyond the physical. We got to get out of this fear, this cloud of fear, move towards what fulfills us, to be kind. Like I say just like do an act of kindness, and that's a big one from David. It's just like you could go, I'm going to do a talk, right, on like consciousness, and then or spirituality, and then I go get my coffee and I'm like, screw you, man, you suck, you know what I mean? Or I'm impatient with the guy. Like, our quality of life is how we navigate all of that stuff on the way to our goals. You know what I mean? And the more we can do that, that's going to improve our quality of life, but also impact each individual person as we go, and not to lessen that impact. So I just want to give it back to you to kind of share in that, and maybe share some of your, stories that make people think, because it's important to realize that we're playing. Even the story you already shared about healing yourself is a miracle. You know what I mean? I want people to really understand what you said. This is medically impossible, but in your guts, you knew that this was the only way. You were forced. You used all the tools that you knew, and it was totally outside of your control, right? You went with the feeling and total faith of something else, and it's the only thing that you could do. And if we can touch that within ourselves, because it doesn't matter if you're a single mom looking to level up, if you're going to let go of a job and you've got all the money and you want to go towards something you're more passionate about, we all have these tests. But you must go first for the universe, for source, for spirit, for something to come in and assist you in that way that feels more aligned.
Yeah. Well, let me make sure I stay on track with this. What out of that, what would the question be that I should spring from here right now?
I don't know.
Okay. No problem. No problem. I just wanted to make sure I stayed, I stayed somewhat here on track.
We're off the rails. We got no track.
Yeah, right. Here's the thing. Let's use that example just because we covered that territory, and it'll be in context here from, when I had the issue with the kidney transplant and coming off the medications. Let's be clear. While I like to sit here on the other side of it and say that night I decided that it was going to be this way and blah, blah, blah. When I, realized when I woke up the next morning, I didn't actually wake up the next morning. I stayed up that whole night crying, as I said. But when I got after it the next day, day after, and every morning early on, to say I was in that state of knowingness would be a total lie now in looking back. It was, I'm going to give this a hell of a try, if nothing else. And then I think along the way, kind of like when I got introduced to Thomas Starzl, that made me go, okay, well, maybe this is possible. I mean, I think there's some tricks of languaging where we take the impossible into the possible that we've kind of talked about already. So the deeper question, when you talk about that eternity, experience, Satori, right? Some people call it that one taste of that, as you said, for many of us, it happened in meditation, that all is eternal, that I am eternal, that knowingness, that you are more than this body, that I'm more than this emotion, that I'm more than this fear, that I'm more than this certainty, that I'm more than, and by the way, some people discount, they say I'm more than my fears, I'm more than my worries, I'm more than my concerns, and they forget that we're also more than our certainties. We're more than what we think we know, which I hope is a lesson that's come, we've beaten that, nail into the ground here today. But it's not designed to make a person uncertain. It's designed to deepen that knowingness, which I think is two different things. I think a certainty is a level of belief, where a knowingness just kind of is, for those of us that have had that experience. And I from your shaking your head, it looks like you kind of were on the same wavelength there. So, striving to find that experience, each one of us, for ourselves. And very honestly, the most simplistic way is, as I said, I think, sit, get still, go deep, and find what is there, for you. And inside of all of that, then ask yourself, with my life, at my age, with my background, everything I know, everything I think I know, all that is, how can I best serve? And then follow the hell out of that path. Honestly, I think that takes a lot of what we've talked about here and boils it down into what is actually doable by anybody listening with us today. Because while we are more than our past, while we are more than our belongings, there's no doubt about that. Those things can play a role in us helping us find our path. And in that place of stillness, in that place of eternity, in that place of knowing, to say, okay, let's go. What does my path look like today? And work on today. And work on now. And not be concerned with tomorrow, not be concerned with next week, but just work on what you can now, the absolute best that you can, in spite of the fear, in spite of the worry, in spite of the concern, and in spite of the certainty, in spite of the knowingness, in spite of the ego, and in spite of the bigness of head as well, that we all can have as humans. To just try to find, as simply as you can, how can I best serve, and work from there. Gosh, I think if all of us did that a little bit more in our lives and did it with a little more faith, each of us can do that, though, in any moment.
That's a beautiful answer. And I 100% agree. I say that sometimes, like, enlightenment is not from what I can give, but is how it can help. How can I assist? Yeah. And I think that the assistance comes from our natural gifts. I kind of use the analogy of being in a forest, and if a beaver recognizes it's a beaver, then the whole ecosystem of the forest is going to work out. But if the beaver is pretending to be a seagull or something, it doesn't really work that way, and the beaver is going to be unhappy. So it's a very simple process, a lot harder to do. And I think that when you talked about your story about having that faith, and you're not sure, you're not going to have certainty. When people do these things, you are very uncertain. Just like, I'm so certain that this works out. Sometimes I have doubts, with all the stuff that I've experienced and gone through. I'm just like, am I just nuts? Am I just going to go into a white room? And thankfully the podcast is a reflection. Someone's like, no, Matt, you're okay. I had that too. It's like, okay, good. But what will happen when you start to move towards those things and do those things, I say you get like a little wink from the universe. And your wink was that doctor. It said, you went like this, and now all of a sudden something has showed up in your reality, and you get this feedback from your actions, this feedback. And so there's a few different ways I could go with it right now. One of them, I was going to ask you, like, one of the most wild stories that you've experienced, one of the most crazy out there experiences that you've had. I'm just curious if you can share one of those.
Sure. I mean, how crazy do you want to go? Just crazy? Like,
as crazy as you got. I shared my, well, whatever you want. It'll be dealer's choice.
I got very lucky as well in my late teens to be introduced to a couple of spiritual teachers who were with me for years. They've since left the planet, and yet are still here. In my experience, at least. I had several experiences at retreats with them, of them showing up places that they should not have been. I've actually had that experience with lots of people I've known through the years who were powerful people, of them, astral projecting, or whatever one might want to call it. I like to think of it as they showed up right at the right moment, right place, right time, because that also leaves open the possibility that it could happen for anybody in my life who's meant to be sent to me as a teacher. And that could be someone on the street walking their dog who we talk to. I believe those. When I went to India, I'm trying to think of my late 30s, I went to India for a month for a meditation retreat and some other things. And in India, there's if I get the Sanskrit correct, there's Sat Guru. There are two types of gurus. Sat Guru. Sat Guru is true guru. I hope I'm getting this correct. And that's a person. That's an incarnation. That's a being that we can go. They're a true guru. They lead the way. Their words, for instance, we should follow. True guru. Then there's Upa guru. Upaguru are the things that happen to us and the circumstances, conditions, problems, opportunities. It's everything in the world outside of Satguru that is sent to us to wake us the fuck up. That is Upaguru. And so staying on high alert for where Upaguru is at work in my life right now, who is sent to wake me the F up, I think is also an important part of all of this kind of conversation as we begin to bring it to a close. And like I said, you know, I had this knowingness of these people that were spiritual teachers just showing up out of thin air for me, like literally right before my eyes, materializing as we talk wild stories. But I like to take that and think of it as, wow, that wasn't just that he or she materialized like that. Later in life, I learned, wow, that's kind of Upaguru. So that person showed up and bumped into my cart at the grocery store, possibly because they were sent to help wake me up, or that person cut me off in traffic, or, you know, we know all the examples of this because we use them all the time in conversation. Trying to remember out of that story of seeing this person literally materialize out of nothing, my spiritual teacher, the learning for that as I've tried to carry through my life has been watch out for Upaguru, because they will be sent to us at all times.
Amazing, man. Well, I love how you phrase that, because I've had some wild experiences in my life. And if you look at the Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a very common book, most people have read that book. It's this journey of the yogi, and then wild stuff happens through these different segments, but they're not every single day. It's one, and then he faces a big challenge and follows his heart and his mission, and then it's wild experience, right? And what those experiences are, I think, are just winks and nudges that you're walking the path. And I'll give a personal story. I was on my bike the other day, and I had such a busy day. I've been working really hard this summer and doing all kinds of stuff. And I was just like, I need some help. And I was like, why am I on a bicycle? I'm 34. I'm just kind of going through this ridiculous mental thought. And then I was like, oh, I am the help. You know what I mean? I'm doing things to help other people. Like, and when I did that for myself, because I was like, why, when I was growing up, is it so uncommon to think about how you could help somebody? Why is it uncommon to be, wanting to help your fellow man and to just think about being a good human being? Why am I weird for that? Why am I weird for wanting to see what the heck this body can do and questioning people that are obviously full of crap? You know what I mean? There's so much nonsense. Like, how do you not see through that nonsense? Why are we not picking each other up? Why are we not sharing information? Why are we murdering each other over these stupid labels that do not exist? No country, no belief system, no God, no nothing. It's one humanity here. And it just like is frustrating that so many people, that's a foreign concept for that. We need to actually close ourselves down more and more and more and more. You never know who your neighbor's going to be. You never know who that guy's going to be. Oh, don't go to Mexico because of something. Don't go to Canada because they'll shoot a hockey puck at you. Don't go to Russia because they're all drunk on vodka. You're like, what are you talking about? You go there and you realize that everybody is the same, having a human experience, and people are beautiful and people are amazing. And I think that that's our natural nature. And yes, there are some scary stuff out there, but there's nothing to be afraid of here. You can be the example in your town, in your community, in your actions. And that is enough. You don't have to be Mother Teresa. You don't have to start a $1 billion company. Just be the example of kindness and awareness and compassion with where you are. And that's a beautiful, massive ripple. And if you're at a job, because I get this all the time, they're like, your podcast helped because I realized I wasn't nuts. But I was like, you're the example. That's why it's so hard, because you're just being aware, and rather than reflecting that negativity and slamming it back in their face, you're just learning more about yourself and your own understanding. So I'll just give that, if you want to make any comments on that, or I'll ask a question.
No, that's beautiful, man. We're speaking the same language, on the same wavelength, man.
Well, we've touched on so much.
I don't want to add to it. You said it beautifully. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, brother. Well, I could definitely talk to you all day. You're so knowledgeable and energetic and amazing, and you have such a good energy. I'm going to ask if there's anything that you wish that I had asked you or you want to touch on. And I was also going to say there's, a bunch that I kind of wrote down here, but along the lines of like your recommendations for top books, top speakers, top resources, top guides where you can go out there. And then also just a little bit of a guide on like how we can build up our self-worth and overcome fear. Because I think that even when I work with athletes and business people and things like that, how do we get fulfillment, overcome self-worth? Because even sometimes for me, I'm just like, oh man, just what I say to myself is, I would never say that to anyone else. Why do we say it to ourselves? So I'm just wondering if you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So first question, books, things like that, recommendations. I'll try to put this within context of what we talked about today. So I recommended a couple, obviously, Second Brain. We talked about offhandedly when you mentioned authority, I talked about Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that. Great book. We talked about earlier on as well, I believe another book, It'll Come to Me. I'll think of what it is. But as a cap on top of this conversation, I would say, I'm a big fan of Ryan Holiday's work right now. I love Obstacle is the Way. And his other books, Daily Stoic, which I'm doing literally this year as well. A big fan of Ryan's work. So the obstacle is the way, that which is placed in your path as the impediment is used to make the way. Certainly, if you put a cap on a lot of what we've talked about today, that's one good way of looking at it. That, that medication that was killing me and that I had to get over, in getting over it, yeah, it could be a story of inspiration. I'll tell you what, though, Matt, the bigger inspiration, hopefully that can be here, is that paper that was written about me opened up the work that is now being done for transplant patients that are allowing them to be freed from those drugs. By the way, this is not, anything I have any professional thing to do with whatsoever. It's that ripple, like you said. It's that ripple effect. And, as we sit here now, 15 years, right? I'm right at 15 years since that happened. As we sit here 15 years from that time, there are people who would have been dying from immune suppression, toxicity to their bodies, who've been freed from the drugs because of the research that's been done in that preceding 15 years. So us each being that ripple effect and looking for where we were the ripple effect in the world, not to stroke our ego, to pat ourselves on the back, but instead, to get further and deeper into our service, knowing that will begin the ripple that'll last long beyond us. And so, as far as, books, thoughts, anything like that, as we begin to finish up here, I'd say, remember that, whatever spiritual or religious practice, I hope out of this conversation as well, a person is into, I hope they'll go more deeply into that. So whatever they found to be of value for themselves, spiritually, religiously, whatever it might be, I honor it. Let's all go deeper. I think the world could use a little bit more of that right now. And then finally, I would say, out of everything, always keep your eyes open for Upaguru and kindred spirits, that you bump into in life, because those are sacred moments in themselves as well.
Beautiful. Joe, well, it's been a privilege and an honor, man. You shared so much wisdom and so much energy. I was like fired up the whole time on your energy. Where can people find out more about you? And if you have any other closing thoughts or anything you want to go deeper on, be my guest.
Yeah. So if they want to find out anything about the work that we do for people with presentation skills, making them badass speakers, and what I call leaders in the impact industry, that we have out there right now, getting your message out there more powerfully, you can check us out at joewilliamsonline.com, joewilliamsonline.com, or hit me up on Facebook and we can connect there, obviously. And then, as far as final thoughts, dude, I would just say, I, not to sound like I'm, brown nosing here, but, I honor you. I honor everyone out of a conversation like this who have dedicated their lives to making an impact that then has that ripple effect. The work that I do with, people as speakers and presentation skills, dude, I've gravitated there as one little aspect that I am better than any other fucking person in the world with, because that's been an area of focus. Now, some people sometimes say to me, why don't you expand? Why don't you do more? You've done so much with Tony and others. Why don't you, blah, blah, blah. It's because it's where I'm called right now. And it's where I know I do as well or better than any other effing person on earth. And so I'm going to throw my heart, my soul, and everything in my being into that, and everybody that I can serve there. And I hope out of answering that as well, that was not a sales pitch, but it shows the fire and the passion and the love and the honor and the respect and the humility that I hope anybody who comes out of this conversation will find for themselves.
Beautiful, Joe. I appreciate you. Yeah. And I think that it's, that energy is following your bliss. It's what lights you up. It is your direction beyond anything else. Like for me right now, for this last couple of years, it's been the podcast and the book. It's been beyond anything. Right now I'm studying with David Lonebear, and like helping him is like, that's the thing that I feel called to do. Yes. And if it changes, I'll change it. And I am enthusiastic as heck about it. And you should if it resonates with you, come get some. It's awesome. If you like the podcast, share it. You know what I mean? If you hate it, keep it to yourself. Don't tell me I'm too sensitive. But yeah, man, I honor your work, and that's the path. And there was so much beautiful wisdom in here. So thank you so much for your work and what you're doing. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Definitely, man. Thank you so much for everything today.
My pleasure. See you, everybody. Peace.